Good early morning, peoples. This is Bruce with Targeted Wealth Creation. Speaking of the commodity super cycle, I've got an interesting play. It's very speculative. So before anybody jumps out there and buys it, I want you to listen to this. Does it have tremendous upside potential? Absolutely. Could you just lose your investment or half your investment? Absolutely. So to me, it's only worth mentioning because the upside could be so big. And I happen to have been in it for 4 or 5 years now. Made a bunch of money initially, and then the last buy-in was a year and a half ago, going on 2 years, and I'm down maybe 10%. But now, for the first time ever in the company, they've actually found some oil and they're moving to production testing. Since they own one of the largest land masses, they being Reconnaissance Africa, short Recon Africa, US OTC symbol RECAF, and Canadian, where they're actually headquartered on the venture, is RECO. Okay, same company, all of that. They started back in 2000. Look at this, I guess 17, 18, 19. I first heard about them in 2020, around April. I bought some right around here, 40 cents, 42 cents. And what I was started to do was identify some patterns here for you because you guys know I love technical analysis. But it's really now about fundamentals. And I'm going to take you through a journey here. I'm going to show you as much content as I can, explain this. But one of the reasons that I like it and always have is that it's part of the commodity super cycle. Or, we didn't necessarily have a commodity super cycle for these number of years, but I knew one was coming. And, it doesn't matter what the oil price is. We're talking about potentially billions of barrels of oil. And that's been the story all along. They never found it, and all this was over speculation and over hype. And it's one of the reasons I sold off right around here, right? I rode this up a lot of the way, but I also had some trading shares. So I think I came out here and had 10,000 shares initially, around 40 cents. So there's a lot to tell. There's a lot to unpack here. I'm going on memory a lot, but when I show you videos and current interviews with the CEO, press releases, all of that, because there's a few different ways to play this. It's such a cheap stock for US. It's, 62 cents. I think it's 75 or 80 on the Canadian, right? But so it's still equivalent, whatever the Canadian is to the US dollar. It's just you pay a different currency, right? But the market cap on this thing is significantly low, although they've increased the amount of shares over time and they've had to borrow some money, but they have an excellent CEO who came in right around here, came in early August 1st, 2023. All of this was done by a completely different management team. And Brian, although there were some all-star names in this original management team, um, they never, you have to think about 6.3 million acres in northeast Namibia. And it's a very democratic controlled country. We're not talking about West Africa. We're talking about Southern Africa. So very tame, very, democratic government, still very poor. They want to get in on the gold train. They want to get in on the oil train, right? So this original management team, who were some geologists, were some executives in oil companies in the previous, a lot of retired, went out and said they negotiated, they picked up and bought out this massive amount of acreage. The way you do things in certain countries over there is the government is entitled to 10%, and then you buy the mineral rights, and you don't really own them. You get a 50-year lease or an 80-year lease, and then they get 10% of the profit. So you spend all the money and the effort, and you have to run everything by them. They want to make sure you environmentally protect Namibia. So there's a lot of things. And the original company got a little sideways with some of that. On the other hand, they were drilling water wells for the people. Didn't cost them a huge amount of money, but when people water is scarce, and women are going down to rivers and getting water and putting it on their heads and living how first world countries lived 50, 70, 80, 100 years ago, and they're carrying all that water back to have a water well out there, right, where you have fresh, clean water. And so Recon Africa did a lot of that. They did a lot of social things, and the environmentalists from other countries stuck their nose in and said, "Oh my gosh, this is reserves for elephant. You can't drill there." Started telling Namibia what they could and couldn't do. And they said, "Hey, it's our sovereign land. We're the ones to decide if that's environmentally protected or not." And so this thing had lawsuits, this thing had, but a lot of that stuff was involved here. And I think the management team got tired. So when they hired Brian, and let me get back to patterns, and then I'll get you up to speed because, like I said, there's a lot to unpack. And I don't want to tell you something real simple. And then you guys go out and say, "Oh, well, I didn't know about this. I didn't know about that." Always vet, always do your own research. Don't just follow me into something. But I will tell you a lot of the things that I evaluate to vet this to say, do I want to risk some capital? But it is risk. It is speculation. Okay. But it's huge on the upside. And you could lose all your money, but more than likely probably going to lose a third or a half, and they're going to be back drilling another well, and this one isn't going to be as good as we think it is. Okay, but here you had a classic inverse head and shoulders, right? Here's your head, here's your shoulders, and this is a slanted one a little bit. And then what did it do? It just continued. And this is a bull flag, right? Here's your pole, here's your flag, runs again, gets up here, another bull flag, and then runs up, and this is the top. I mean, I had it at 40 cents and it went to 12 something. I didn't get out, but what I did do along the way, there were many times that I did 2 and 3 days swings. You know, I bought when it broke out here, right? I sold some up here. I bought some back in. I sold some. So I must have traded it 15 or 20 times and extracted, 1,000 here, 1,000 there, because it started getting more expensive, 2, 3, $4. And then I held on at 6,000 shares, I think. I got down here. I said, I don't like what's happening. I don't know where this is going. It's still FOMO. But one of the problems when you got that kind of acreage, you're doing 2D and ultimately 3D. But remember, this company's an upstart. They didn't have any revenue. It cost on average. Now, onshore drilling is much, much cheaper than offshore drilling. And there's been some big finds right offshore in Nambia. And literally, Shell is involved, Total Energies. There's some big oil companies out there that have found some oil offshore. But if you look at the cost, drilling onshore and producing onshore is much, much cheaper than below the ocean, right? Depends on the depth below the ocean, but still, it's way more expensive. So the thought of this hitting, and everybody studied the rocks and tried to say, is this Permian Basin equivalent? I could go in, it bores me. I don't understand it all that well. I have a basic knowledge of geology. If rocks and it's more prone to, and then the other big thing that I've learned really through this about oil exploration is there may be oil somewhere, but if you don't catch it in traps, nature's traps, then the oil runs sideways and goes all over the place through the rocks. You want it where there's a trap. So every time they thought they found a little bit of oil shows, or in the drill, they had section in the core that showed some oil, but it wasn't recoverable, right? It's not a big trap. And so they know that ultimately in this 6.3 million acres, and so they continue to do seismic work, right? So you come out and you literally do seismic work. You run these roller machines on the earth and they vibrate and send a signal down, and it comes back up, and they measure, what the structure looks down like. And so you're talking 6, 8, 10, 12,000 feet, right? I think this last drill, they went down 4,240 meters deep. And that's the max of the well. Now, interesting, this management team, when they formed the company, I watched conferences, I listened to things, and they, out of Houston, they built their own rig. I think it cost them 150,000, because if you go over to Namibia and you want to rent and bring somebody out and set it up and drill, it's 4 or 5 times the cost if you have your own drill. So they put it on a tanker, they put it on some, you know, boat, and they shipped it over. And it was a lot of excitement. I remember that the stock was moving up, just the fact that they were going to go to this potential rich oil land that they had acquired the rights to, and everybody was excited. And that's what led to a lot of this. It was, and then they had one well, then they had two. My guess is, going back in memory, probably 4 to 5 wells throughout this part of the history. And each and every one, at the end of the day, while some were more successful than others and had some slight oil shows or something, it wasn't what they call commercial. You couldn't extract it, right? So just a little bit of oil, there's not a big enough trap for the reservoir to extract it and have flow rates and be commercially viable. And they started running out of money when it came down to it, right? You get 4 or 5 drills, you got $100 million in all of your costs, and you don't really have a revenue. And then they had some lawsuits on, oh, you hyped it more than what was really there, and they had to settle with some damages. And I never was involved in that, because again, I made money on the way up, and then I got out here on my core shares. I mostly made the money on trading, kept my core shares, and got out here from here. So it was great. I watched for an entry. So my last entry is back here. I heard they were getting a new CEO. So I'm 15% down, something like that. I'm around $1. But that didn't bother me. I knew that this thing is a play out. 6,000 shares at $1, it's like $6,000 investment. Okay. And I knew with the CEO, and I listened to him, the first thing that Brian did was said, hey, we need to get some partners. We need other oil companies as a JV who have expertise here. And then he brought excellent drill people. They assessed what had been 2D and 3D seismic data, and where there might be folds or this trap layers, right, in the underground. And so they already had a drill that existed, although it's somewhat limited. The 4,200 meters, they had tremendous, and they drilled all the way down. Some of these other ones, they stopped at 3,600 meters and said, we're not getting anything to make us want to continue. The current one, they stopped midway through, and they were seeing some great signs. Redid some work, whatever casings. I don't fully understand all the oil terminology. And they continued to total depth. And they finished that about 2 weeks ago. Well, what they're starting to see, normally it takes a month or 6 weeks to do some analysis, some wire logs, all of that kind of stuff. What they did see in the cores in the initial analysis was fantastic. Like I'll play you a video in a minute. 64 meters of total pay, 61 meters further in depth, and they're skipping what's known as a DST. I forget what the acronym is, but it's kind of that wire logging to validate that. And they're going straight to production testing. Okay. If you did wire logging and it validated, then you then do production testing. Well, production testing is really a situation where you attempt to figure out what the flow is by trying to extract some from the various depths. You want to know that that reservoir is there and there's pressure, right? That you can extract. And what kind of flow rates do you get if you can extract? Then you have to do another, what do they call it, assessment well, right? That's going to be another 3 meters away. So we should have all the production testing completed by the end of the first quarter. Now, it probably won't start till February because you have to have there's special equipment. And in Namibia, there's never been any, right? Because Recon Africa is the person that the state government allowed to have all of this acreage. And in the areas they were okay for drilling. And so, but they never gotten to the point that they were going to do production testing. But now that they have BW Energy, who funded them for a 20% stake, they gave them like 35 million, really enough for 3 wells. And now this is their second well under Brian. And it appears like they've really hit. Now, again, it appears. You listen to the words. The market is reacting from down here like that, right? We've gone from 26 cents to 62 cents. I suspect shortly we'll be at $1, another week or two. And then they'll start being, hey, what, so bottom line, they have to get all this specialized equipment in Southern Africa that's not currently there. So you figure from now through Christmas into January, then whenever they start the actual production testing, apparently by the end of first quarter seemed like a reasonable time to have completed that. Then you do the next appraisal well to further validate. Now you take action because if this is a hit, they had plans for where the next well was going to be. Well, that can change the whole next well. You can start literally going into production 5-6 months later. So I just want you to know all of those things that are involved. Now I'm going to start giving you math. I'm going to give you the upside because this is just another oil story, right? I mean, I don't expect you to want to speculate unless you assess potentially what could be there. And then you see some of the videos and you see the people involved in that. Um, so let's go over this interview's, I think I'll go to the better one. Here's a YouTube interview with Brian, the CEO. You can see here if you want to go play it yourself, right? Let's listen to this.
Today we've managed to grab a few minutes of time with Brian Rensberger, the president and CEO of Recon Africa, a company that just recently completed a basin opening discovery in northern Namibia. Brian, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
All right, Justin, it's great to see you again, and happy to have a discussion with what we've accomplished in Namibia.
Brian, we're going to run through a couple of questions relatively quickly. The very first one I wanted to ask you was, look, the announcement made on the 3rd of December, I think, opened a lot of people's eyes. A basin opening discovery in northern Namibia. Can you talk us through what was discovered with the Kavango West 1X well, Brian?
Yeah, well, thank you. There were a lot of eyes in this well, and in fact, a lot of eyes in the previous well we drilled in the full belt as well. So the Kavango West well is our second well in the Namibia full belt. The well reached a total depth of 4,200 meters.
Imagine conducting every part of your research only on one platform. Meet Boreum.
And we found what we anticipated going into it, which is hydrocarbons within the Octavie reservoir. We published 2 zones that we encountered hydrocarbons in. The shallower one is almost 400 meters of gross hydrocarbon column. And in that, there's about 64 meters of net pay calculated. That's a big section. We then drilled deeper, and we encountered another 61 meters of very strong oil and gas shows in the deeper reservoirs that we'll continue to evaluate. And we stopped drilling because of the rig capacity. that was the deepest this well could drill with this casing design. So we're super pleased with what we found. This had so many eyes on it because of the scope. We're not just testing one prospect; we're testing entire play. So as you've probably seen for our corporate deck, we have almost 19 prospects mapped on our seismic data. And the interesting thing to keep in mind is that's just where we shot seismic. So we have a lot of acreage to the northwest on our Namibia concession that we think this full belt goes in, and in fact a lot of areas to the south. So when we say 19 prospects, that just is over what we've shot on 2D. So we think this thing has a lot of scope. And boy, when you get hydrocarbons onto your second well in a new play, you get pretty excited about what you have. So we're super, super happy with this. Our partner, BW Energy and Namcor, are equally as excited as we are. So we're in a great position right now.
Brian, I'm going to put you a little bit on, you mentioned testing in the first quarter of 2026. Are you able to give us any more sort of light on that, any tighten up that time frame at all?
Yeah, well, we're just starting planning. We're going through procurement. We have to source the tools from around the world. We have to source the casing string. We decided to go straight to a production test versus a DST, largely because we have a large interval of interest. We may test up to 8 zones in this, so we want to have it cased off to allow us to go into very selectively isolate and test intervals of interest. So it takes a lot of planning for that, and this will be Namibia's first production test. So again, Recon is breaking new ground here. So we want to get this right. We have to get the equipment in country. It's coming from all over the world. And we and our partners are just starting to plan logistics, the philosophy, what we want to get out of this production test. But it's a big deal. My view was the key next step for us to get rate and phase. And then we'll be able to right size the path going forward.
Brilliant. And I suppose that the next question is, and I know I'm pushing you a little bit here, Brian, but in terms of a resource estimate, what would you think in terms of a timeline when we might get something from Recon on that?
Yeah, it's important that we have good controls in those estimates coming out. Very rarely do you get a resource estimate with just one penetration point.
Yep.
Now, keep in mind that Kavango prospect discovery is 20 kilometers long and 5 kilometers wide. So we have a 6-inch wellbore as our control in that vast area. So the steps for me are getting, of course, we have a really good control point where we're at right now. The production test is going to give us deliverability on these reservoirs in phase. And then on success, that would then lead us to an appraisal well immediately after this. Right now, we're going through the planning and permitting on that well. It's probably about 3 to 4 kilometers away along structure. But it's important, and at that point, after we get that appraisal well, we'd be at a point to put out some disclosure on resource ranges. So that's a sequence of events right now. Right now, we're in the planning stage, and it's important to realize we got a scenario plan. We got a plan for a success case. We got a plan for a medium outcome and a downside case. And we're on that full spectrum right now of looking at all those different options. Of course, we think we're going to stay in success case, and that's what we tend to plan towards. So, big structure, and we gotta test this appropriately. We gotta have really strong control points when we do disclose resources, and that'll come after these next 2 events in front of us.
Brilliant, thank you, Brian. And the next one I want is, Brian, to me, this should be sort of a lesson to the wider industry. I mean, most of the time, we watch these things a lot, and oftentimes, there'll be 1 well, there'll be 2 wells, there'll be 3 wells. By that time, most operators have called it quits. What was it that encouraged Recon to continue drilling and continue testing?
That's a great point, Justin, because a lot of people is one shot and gone. I guess there's a number of variables in that. One is the cost structure. We're onshore. Our wells cost $10 to $15 million a piece. Now, if these were $150 million wells a piece, your stomach to keep going on would be probably a little bit tighter. But the other thing is just the persistence is needed and opening up new plays. And, for the audience, you got to realize you're putting together a puzzle here.
There's a simple way to protect your privacy online and get full access to worldwide.
One piece at a time. And even though the 3 wells were drilled 4 or 5 years ago on a different geological play, they gave us a lot of indication that there's oil up in this region. And in fact, one of those last wells they had drilled 3 or 4 years ago, called the Cowee well, penetrated the carbonate reservoirs we were after in the Full Bell, and it had oil in it. But there's no geological structure, and it had good reservoir. So that control point gave us a lot of indication there's something working in this play. Now, of course, we moved to the Full Belt when I came on board with Chris Zabrinsky. He did a fabulous job at understanding the geology of the Full Belt. And the Gopa well was the first one we drilled in the Full Belt. And it was somewhat of a disappointing well, I would say. We didn't encounter commercial hydrocarbons. What we did find was when we went beneath that major fault, we started seeing oil. And now there's no geological trap again. So we got evidence that there was a generating petroleum system in this region. So we then had to think about where to go next. And the fact that the plan was to go to a prospect called Kambundu. We'd spent $4 million actually constructing a road to that location. And when Chris and I and the team sat down, we said, the right well to go to is Kavango for these reasons, because of what we saw in the Nagopo well. So we pivoted. And some of our shareholders didn't like that because we had to wait 6 months to get Kavango ready. But it was in our view the best next shot on goal, and it had all the bells and whistles and great geological structure, great section, the right depth. So we felt technically we had a really good shot on goal, and all of our business decisions at Recon are technically driven. It had all the political motivation could have gone to the other well, Kambundu, but we felt this was the right one to go to. And sure enough, it was. A lot of the geological positions that Chris put in place turned out to be right. And I give so much credit for Chris Zabrinsky and his team on the geology. And we nobody knows more about this Full Belt than Recon. And a lot of people really would walk away from this, but we were really convicted that the geology was right here. That if it did work, it would be huge in scale. And that's what it takes to open up new plays. Very rarely do you find 1 billion barrels in your first well, but you may, if you keep at it 2 or 3 wells after that, you may find what you anticipate, and we sure enough did here. So it's a great lesson for all the young people in the industry that, it's not easy sometimes. It's not for the faint of heart, but you're putting together a puzzle here, and we worked really hard technically to get this right.
Oh. And Brian, I'd have to say also, I mean, this is the fairy tale for Namibia. It just seems to be continuing. I mean, we've got the offshore discoveries. Now we've got the first legitimate onshore discovery. And what is it? What does this all mean for Recon Africa?
Yeah.
And what do things look like for the company in 2026?
Yeah, well, this is a big result for the company and for the country. You are right. This is the continuation success story in Namibia becoming an energy center for the world. We all read about the offshore Orange Basin success, which I'm a huge advocate of. My experience is all deep water, so I'm a big advocate of what those guys are doing offshore. But this is the reality. You can find the oil onshore too. Right. And we like this. We like the cost structure. We like the infrastructure in this region. A lot of people think it's devoid of infrastructure, and it's actually opposite of that. There's some very well-developed highways up in northern Namibia and rail and electrical lines. So we have all the elements of infrastructure to commercialize our projects, and we plan to do that. What's up for 2026? Obviously, we're planning a production test. Hopefully, it'll happen the very late part of the first quarter. Once we get through the Christmas holidays, we'll have a fairly integrated team looking at this with BW ourselves and Namcor. The results of that will then lead us to the next phase of appraisal for the field, which will be a appraisal well. And then our geoscience guys are pretty chomping at the bit to get more seismic, either a 3D over the structure or a really tight 2D. So all those are sort of sequenced out and dependent upon the results of the previous event. But it's going to be a very busy year. Heck, I'd love to be at FID by this time next summer or next year. And you can be at that. And we're onshore. The costs and economics are very favorable here. So it's different from deep water. But we think we have something really special here. And in terms of the country, this can really have an impact on northern Namibia. Employment, prosperity, and development infrastructure there we plan to continue to be a major part of the community investment up in that region of the country.
And just touching on from that, Brian, I imagine the Namibians must be really excited about this too. Where are you at the moment?
Yeah, well, I'm in Africa. I spent last week in Namibia, Windhoek. Fabulous week, as you can imagine. A lot of buzz on the results of the well. We spent a lot of time with the ministries, talking to them about what we found, what it means, what our plans going forward for. We had time with the president as well and her vast delegation, really to talk about the importance of this well, what it means, what oil field developments look like onshore, and what our commitment and plans are going forward. So a great week in Namibia. Our partners were there, BW Energy and Namcor, spent a lot of time with them. So again, talking through our results, but also talking through our plans going into the production test and beyond that. So we're getting all that formulated now. Keep in mind, we only finished the well a couple of weeks ago. So things have happened fairly quickly since then. Right now, I'm up in Luanda in Angola. As you know, we have a vast acreage position contiguous to our Namibian stuff, almost 6 million acres up there. That's all of a sudden become very valuable to us. So again, I'm meeting with government officials here at ANPG to talk about what we found in Namibia. And, when you find these full belts, they typically have very large aerial extent, and we want to capitalize that on both sides of the border.
Brian, thank you so much for talking to us today, and we're really looking forward to watching Recon progress through 2026, and hopefully you and I'll catch up maybe in April next year at the Namibian International Energy Conference.
We will be there, and I've met the conference people already, and they're eager for us to tell the whole Recon story, because it's the whole Recon story is a fabulous story. I mean, as you know, I took over 3 years ago to turn the company around. Brought in my own team below me, alongside of me, and above me. So after doing all that change and having the results of this well, it's just very gratifying. So I'm pleased with the team I have me and the interactions we're having with government officials as well.
Yeah. So looking forward to catching up, Brian. Thank you again.
Right.
Take care.
Okay, guys. So here's something. Let me find. Okay. So, guys, I've talked about the stock itself. Okay. It's cheap, right? What did I say? 85 cents close on Tuesday in the venture, and 62 cents, as I mentioned, hang on, 62 cents here on recap on OTC for US buyers. Now, there's one more thing to take, because I don't want somebody to say, oh, you didn't mention this, but it's rather complex. So those of you that understand options likely can relate to warrants. So warrants are something you buy that give you the right to own something at a certain price for a certain period of time. So let me just read this to look. So any of you Canadians or Americans that want to buy the Canadian warrants, oftentimes you can. You can do it in Schwab. But it's an extra step because you have to convert from your dollars to the Canadian dollars and so forth. But to me, they're good deals, but but there's enough time in some of them are great buys and some of them aren't great buys on the warrant. But if this stock for me was, the choice between a $50 stock and going by the warrants, I'd probably go buy the warrants. But at 62 cents is not necessary. So this goes on to tell you. Let me just read you some of the highlights. So you know what happened. So the RECO has publicly traded warrants under the symbol RECO.WT.A that can be exercised for one share at 60 cents until June 17th, 2027. So now you're going to have a premium on that warrant. Now think about this. This is on the Canadian side. So right now it's 85 cents. So that would mean that a minimum price would be 25 for the warrant, right? But reality, and so on Monday it was only 21 cents, leaving just 9 cents of time value, right? Because then when this was written, it was the 8th of December. Well, fast forward now, we've had 2 days of trading and this thing's moved up. But you get the idea. right? You buy a warrant, you pay 60 cents, you pay, 30 cents, and the warrant allows you to buy it at 60. So now you've bought it at 90, but you're locked in with that ability to buy it at that price for a fixed period of time. Then the warrant expires, right? So this is good till June 17th, 2027. So it really means this well and production test and appraisal, if this thing breaks and runs, then you just spent 25 cents for the right to buy something at 60, right? No, if this thing's successful, that stock could be $12, but you have the right to buy it at 60 cents. And then what you would do is you would sell your warrant, because now if it's $12 and that gives you the right to buy it at 60, that warrant's going to go to $11. So it's fascinating, right? But it's also, as it gets closer to expiration, it then declines. So you basically have to go out and exercise it at some point. So it talks about WA, then it talks about another warrant. There's just a RICO.WT. And so they basically say, hey, one of these is, and then there's a WT.B. And so they tell you, hey, this one's a good one, this is a bad one, right? You can see up here. I'll highlight this. I don't know. That probably helps you see that on the screen a little bit better. So yeah, no, you can do a search on this kind of stuff. So I don't want to go on and on about warrants on this. So I'm going to close this out. So what do we see here? What pattern, right? This is a classic channel, right? A parallel channel. And here there was some bad news on potential lawsuits and them being sued. And so it dipped down and then came back and so forth. But other than that, it's maintained this channel, right? So it's knocked on the door 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and this is a breakout. And just based on what's going on, this thing may be up another 10 or 50. It'd probably be up to $1 on Wednesday. I'm guessing. Could it go down a couple cents on? And I'm talking Canadian. So at 62, maybe this thing pops and runs to 75. I easily could see something, maybe even $1, $1.50, just going further into next year while they're waiting on the production testing results, right? Now, let's do some math even beyond that. This is a fun part, right? Like, well, Bruce, what's the thing worth? You said it could go really, really high. Okay, well, let's take a look. So I went out and I used AI, although I could really calculate this. I just was in a hurry to pull all this together. So I went out to AI, but you have to know, again, if you don't do a good question scenario with AI, you're not going to get the right kind of answer. So I said, hey, can you help me estimate future market cap values for simple recap? It has found oil in its recent drilling effort. Results were positive, so it's moving directly to production testing. Give it a little background. The upside is the potential 1 billion barrels of oil. Now, they may, when they do production testing and all that, say it's only efficient to pull out 100 million barrels, right? And then on top of that, your recoverability, right? They could say, hey, we've identified that the reservoir contains approximately 1 billion barrels of oil. But the production testing also says, but the ability to extract it is probably a tenth. Maybe it's a third, maybe it's a half. You guys in the oil field and engineers would understand that more, right? So there's no guarantee that even if they found 1 billion barrels in the reservoir, that's what further appraisal well and so forth, that you understand the flow and the ability. They do see a reservoir, they do see long amounts of oil shows, and they're excited to move straight into production testing. So I just took a scenario to begin with and said, okay, they found 1 billion. They found 1 billion recoverable barrels of oil. And then I said, here's what the current market cap. So in American dollars is 204 million. If you look under Canadian, I want to say it's like 240. And then that's easily calculated. Go out and see what the outstanding shares are and look at the price, and that tells you what the market cap is. So what could it go to? Okay, determine the value of oil reserves. So potentially 1 billion barrels, right? And again, they may find 1 billion and they may only say it's economically feasible to extract 1/10 or 100 billion. But I went initially with 1 billion barrels and said, what about oil at 60? What about oil at 80? And what about oil at 100? Well, you guys know I think oil's going to 140 in a few years and then likely as high as 240. But I'm not even bringing that into the equation. Okay. The market cap, so we talked about that, 204. Okay. So future market caps. So now they come out and said at $60 a barrel, assuming 100, assuming 1 billion barrels, what did they do? Okay, summary of estimated future market caps, because they don't. So what they didn't give me the share price, then I had to hit them with, okay, I could do the math, but I'm going to make them do the math while I got them. At $60 oil, the market cap becomes 60.204 billion, based on the fact that they could extract 1 billion barrels. And at 80, it's 80 billion, 100 billion at 100 oil, right? So I said to calculate the share price, we need to do the following steps after I ask them to do that. So here we go. So they're saying, hey, it's $60 a barrel. That's current, roughly current oil price, 58, right? By the time they get done here, I suspect it'll be 70 or in the 60s. It's $295. So you're buying something at 72 cents. Now, this is the most optimal of optimal, guys. Am I telling you that that's probably going to happen? No. But they could find 1 billion ounces. A billion, God, I'm switching between mining. 1 billion barrels easily. And if they didn't, but they may only be able to extract 100. Let's say they only find 100 million barrels in this fold, and they do the appraisal well. And let's say they can only capture 10% of that. Then you just keep drilling down, right, on the numbers. Not that difficult. And you start to say, so at $60 oil, it's $295 a share. At 80 oil, it's $392. At 100 oil, it's $490. So guys, I think I caught some people's attention of why the speculation. Would I go out and put $100,000 in this thinking I'm going to make 100 times my money? Hell no, right? For me, it's a small sum to put 6,000 in it. Okay. I suggest you maybe go out and put 1,000 or 2,000. Again, you could lose it. It's still speculation, right? What happens when they go in there and the production test says we thought we could pull it out and there's a lot of oil in the reservoir, but for this reason and that reason. So now they're having to drill in a better spot where they can pull it off, right? And you're delayed, but you didn't lose your 72 cents, 80 cents that you bought it for, because it's going to take a while. I mean, you could trade it. You could buy it at 80 cents. Probably on Monday, on Wednesday, it's going to open up and move some more. That's why I'm trying to get this out to you, right? So if you want to trade it, trade it. I'm not, because there's too much upside to trade. I traded it before, but that would be after it got in and they started, telling you how many barrels might be in the reservoir and what's their ability in the production test to extract it. All right, guys. So going on. So I said, okay, just pretend they can only get 10% out and they do find 1 billion, which would be a minimum likely extraction capability. Well, it's 60 oil, it's $30 on 72 cents. But again, what if they only capture 250 million barrels? Then it's 1/4 of that, right? It's $7. Well, you spent. Do you see how you drill it down? No pun intended. And that's at $60, right? So you got $7.50 stock if they only found 250 billion or 250 million barrels, and they can only extract 10%. So I see way more upside. And remember, they have some partners. They get a percentage. At I think that this Namcor is the state, right? The government has 10%. I'm not sure if it's a full 20 for BW, but it's the numbers are so staggering, guys. It's unbelievable with that acreage and just how much oil may in fact be there. And it's been difficult. It's been a 4 or 5 year with about 5 or 6 wells to get to where they are. I love Brian. I love his head geologist. He pivoted and didn't go to the easy place. It's hard to tell the shareholders, hey, we spent 4 million because we thought that was the right place to go. But when we went back and reviewed the results of our first well, it touched oil. It just didn't find the reservoir. So maybe we need to go where that reservoir probably is, where it extends to, than this other area. And they re-looked at the seismic. So, guys, there's a lot of upside. Okay. But again, speculative. I'm not here to tell you this is going to happen. So please don't go out and put a ton of money in that. Okay, because it is speculative. It's way more speculative than our gold and silver miners that are 10 baggers, guys, because there's still a lot of unknowns. Not saying, but it's also got a lot of good things going for it. I've been following this story for 6 years, so I have a lot of knowledge on it. And I've kept my shares over here, right, in this position. Like I said, I'm down. Do I have any concern at all for that? Absolutely not. It's like a $6,000 investment. I made more than that trading this up, and I made way more than that when I did cash out after I realized, this thing could really fall. And I had to get back in because I still loved the story. All right, guys, that's what it is. So there's a Bruce with Targeted Wealth Creation. This is not financial advice. This is very speculative. But hopefully, there's some stuff out, guys. You can go out to Reddit. I think StockTwits has some data. Reddit has a lot. I remember in previous drill sites, people were doing satellites and trying to look at gas shows and all of that. Sometimes I go out, I've been to all those sites, I've looked at it. Right now, I got the easy stuff because I like Brian. I know what they were doing, I know what they were looking for. So it's exciting, guys. It's really, really exciting. I love to be in this, and it fits our commodity super cycle. All right, guys, head now. Bye for now.